All right, let's begin. This will be class number 2 of Creation Science 102. We're continuing where we left off. Last week we talked a little bit about the giant insects that are found. Who remembers a little bit from last week about the what's a problem that with giant insects today? What would be a problem why they couldn't survive? Who remembers? Yes, sir.
Not enough atmospheric pressure.
Not enough pressure. What does the pressure have to do with the size of an insect?
They breathe through their skin.
They breathe through their skin, right? And they just don't have enough skin compared to the size, the volume of their body. Okay, now we're going to talk about what happened in Glen Rose, Texas. If you go to Dallas and head over to Fort Worth and drop south, west, about 45 miles, you'll see the town of Glen Rose, Texas. It's yellow there on the map. Glen Rose, small town, about 2,000 or 3,000 people, I believe. The river that runs right through town is called the Paluxy River. Now, the Paluxy is the second to the fastest moving river in Texas. They gauge rivers by how far they drop per mile. If it runs 1 mile, how far does it drop? The Mississippi, for instance, in 1 mile drops 8 inches. 8 inches of drop for a mile of river. The Paluxy drops 17 feet per mile. So it's, I don't know what the fastest one is, but it's the second to the fastest moving river in Texas. The problem with this type of river is when you get a lot of rain in a hurry, you get flash floods. These kind of rivers flood easily, and the Paluxy floods very easily. And they're working on projects about putting dams every so often to prevent this flash flooding. But in 1908, there was a flash flood in Paluxy. They said the water was 27 feet above flood stage, and it went roaring through the area and just destroyed the bottom of the river. Now, I've been to the Paluxy. You've not been there yet, have you, Eric? You need to go there sometime. But been there 3 times. The whole area is layers of limestone, which is a rock a little softer than concrete, but roughly similar to concrete. Thick layers of limestone all over this area. And the Paluxy River bed is on top of one of these layers of limestone. So the river is basically flat all the way across. Most rivers, as you walk in, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and then more shallow and more shallow. Oh, not the Paluxy. You jump in, and if it's 2 feet deep, it'll be 2 feet all the way across. That's the way the river is. Okay. Well, in 1908, this river flooded, and the water went roaring through there 27 feet above flood stage and ripped off a layer of limestone, about 2 feet thick. This layer of limestone that was pulled off on the bottom exposed another layer underneath. You can see there the people standing next to the exposed layer, just about a 2-foot drop in limestone there. The layer underneath contained thousands of dinosaur footprints. There were so many footprints there, they decided years later to make it a state park. But at first, in 1908, the local people, it was kind of an oddity. Hey, come see the footprints here. And, nobody knew much about it. They didn't care much about it. Outsiders in the rest of the world didn't know. In the early 30s, during the Depression, one of the work projects here in America to keep people working, to give them a job, they sent some people there to Paluxy River to chisel out large blocks of these footprints. The American Museum sent a group down there, headed by a guy named Roland T. Bird. Roland Bird was in charge of the project. They would sandbag the river, pump out the water, because it's generally, only a foot deep or so. It's not a lot of water normally, except during rainy season. But if you go there in the summer, oftentimes it dries up completely. There's no water at all. But they sandbagged it, pumped the water out, found some sections of dinosaur tracks, and sawed them out. Now, they broke them up into hundreds and hundreds of pieces and numbered all the pieces, loaded these chunks onto a truck, took them to museums, and reassembled the pieces like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Took a long time to do this. Here's the guys, you can see them right behind this section of tracks they're about to chisel out. They reconstructed the tracks, fixed all the seams that they had made, and put them in museums. Quite a few museums around America have sections of tracks, or at least a few tracks from the Paluxy River. One of the reasons for taking the tracks out of the river and putting them in a museum is Glen Rose is way out of the way. Not many folks go there. Okay? Better to have them in a museum where people can see them. Secondly, the river was going to continue to destroy these tracks. Erosion would ruin them eventually. And so this preserves them for people to see. Here's the famous photo of the little boy taking a bath in a dinosaur footprint. The Tommy Pendley photo, it's called. They said he was very reluctant when they said, "Would you like to take a bath?" Little boys are about baths, but Finally, they said, well, you get to wear your clothes and get in the footprint. Oh, okay. So he sat down, and they took this photo of Tommy sitting in the dinosaur footprint. Roland Byrd went down there in 1930. He was the field explorer for the American Field Museum. He reported that there were 15 to 20-inch long, clearly defined human footprints. Now, they didn't make much, don't talk about this much anymore. Here's a copy of one of those footprints. Now, this one is pretty badly eroded, believe it or not. What you see are the little pock marks all over the footprint. Many of these footprints, when they were first discovered in the 1908 to 1930 era, they were so clear you could see what are called the dermal ridges. Your fingerprints have little raised areas of skin called the fingerprint. You have the same thing on your toes. Only they don't call them a fingerprint. It'd be a toe print or a dermal ridge. Some of these tracks were so clear you could actually see the dermal ridges on the foot. There was one trail of footprints across there. They called it the moccasin trail because it was so clear when it was originally exposed you could see the stitching where they sewed the moccasins together. Where they sewed the pieces of leather together to make their moccasins. Just extremely clear tracks. Well, of course, within a few years, they begin to look like this instead. The clarity begins to disappear. There have been all sorts of people go down there to study these footprints. This is a picture of the Taylor Trail taken by Don Patton. The picture was taken in 1999. Still, recognizable human footprints crossing right over a dinosaur trail. Some of the tracks are still visible. Now, what they've done to these tracks to make them show up like this, they say they're wet out. They dry the area out, and then they go through and find the depressions where the footprints are and pour them full of water. That way they show up better on the picture. I suppose it's theoretically possible to take water and paint an area to look like a footprint, even though it's not a depression. But these are the tracks that they have just filled in the low places, and it makes the shape of a human foot. If you put your foot in there on some of the smaller ones, it'll fit perfectly. I've been there 3 times and walked in them. It's pretty incredible. A guy who owned a lot of this property died, I'm going to say he probably died in 1990, I don't know, quite a while ago. His name was Emmett McFall. Emmett McFall owned a lot of the property where the river runs across. When I stopped there with my students from Texas, Longview, Texas, we took a bus over there to see these things. Emmett McFall gave us a tour around the riverbed and took us and showed us where the tracks are. And we walked in them. He's the one who sold me the toe bone that I have, the dinosaur toe bone. He had found some bones of dinosaurs. He had a whole bunch of strange stuff sitting on tables there that, you know, visitors could come and look at and buy. A real friendly guy. He took us out in the bus and showed us all these things. Well, these footprints have taken a lot of flack even from some creationists. So I want to give you the story of the footprints tonight so that when you speak on this, people will be able to tell you. One of the times that I was there in Texas, a guy came to meet us when we went to the local store to get some Coke or something, and he said, my name is Cecil Daughtery. I heard you're here looking at the footprints. I said, Cecil Daughtery, are you the one that wrote this book? He said, yes, I am. Dr. Cecil Daughtery was a chiropractor who lived there for 17 years in Glen Rose. He spent all of his spare time out photographing footprints, human and dinosaur footprints together. Some of the best pictures that we have of this area, and the whole story is in this book, The Valley of the Giants by Dr. Cecil Daughtery. The footprints, he has a map here showing where the different man tracks are located. Now, the guy's a chiropractor. He knows a little bit about the human body and about stride, you know, how far your steps should be, and about the shape of your foot, you know, when you land on your heel, and how what a footprint should look like. I mean, this was his study for years. And he studied these things very carefully and was convinced they are indeed obvious human footprints. Then John Morris from Institute for Creation Research, Henry Morris's son, John Morris, spent a lot of time there and wrote this book, saying, yep, there are definitely human footprints there. I sat across the table from John Morris several years ago when I spoke at ICR, and I said, John, why did you withdraw your book? He no longer sells the book. He says, Brother Hovind, I've got a whole warehouse full of those books, and I'd love to be able to sell them. He said, but I just cannot in good conscience continue to support the footprint idea in Texas. There was a movie made called The Footprints in Stone by, I forget which group made that movie, but that movie went around the circuit for a while showing the dinosaur and human footprints together, and then they withdrew their movie off the market. So you'll get some people who will give you some flack and say, oh, the creationists don't support those human footprint ideas anymore. Well, here's the points that I would make on this. You might want to write these down. Number one, nobody has ever found human and chicken footprints in the same rock strata. Does that prove humans and chickens did not live at the same time? Obviously not. Chickens are still alive today, right? So you don't need to find the footprints together, first of all. Number two, if a few dinosaurs are still alive, then you don't need to find their footprints together. Okay? So the whole idea is sort of a moot point. It doesn't matter, in one sense, whether there's footprints or not. I believe there are, and I'll get into my evidence for that. But we don't have to find their footprints together to prove they lived together. If we find dinosaurs on artwork, like we showed last week about the Ica stones, and we'll get into a lot more on that later about dinosaurs, I think the fact there's obvious evidence from many lines of reasoning that they lived together. We certainly have the Scripture which teaches us God made everything in 6 days. So the Bible would indicate very clearly that everything was made at the same time and man lived with dinosaurs. So I think the whole argument about the human footprints and dinosaur footprints, though it is still very legitimate, is unnecessary in one sense to prove our point. Okay. I asked John Morris why they withdrew their support, and he said, well, our best human footprint turned into a dinosaur track. Here's what happened. On the back of this book, Texas Tracks and Artifacts, is a drawing of our artist's conception of a guy running, stepping in the footprint of a dinosaur. Now, if you ever walk through deep snow or walk through mud, the logical place to step is right where somebody else already stepped. You follow their footprints, okay? Some of the footprints were right on top of dinosaur footprints when they were found. A few others were found where the trails crossed, where the dinosaur track was on top of the human track, or on top of part of the human track. Now, what would that prove if the dinosaur track is on top of the human track? What does that prove? Dinosaur was there last, right? Sometimes the human track is on top of the dinosaur track. One of the best tracks was, about 8 inches deep in what they call the marl, the limestone. Squished down in there. You look down in there and you see this beautiful human footprints down in the mud. You can see the dermal ridges, everything. Over the years, it gradually begins to get, excuse me, over the years, it gradually begins to get worn out. Pretty soon it starts to get distorted where you can no longer see the clarity of it. And then gradually the toe distinction will disappear and you end up just with an oval-shaped depression. As this track eroded away, it turned into a dinosaur footprint, a 3-toed dinosaur. And the human track was right in the middle. Now it was a big oval-shaped depression. And they said, oh, that was never a human track. It was a dinosaur track all along, and the mud squeezed over the toes, and we just didn't see those outer toes. Because if you step in mud and lift your foot out, there's a chance some of the mud will, squeeze in and distort some of the track. And it was pretty deep into the mud. Well, the truth of the matter is, it was both all along. A human stepped on top after the dinosaur stepped there. Mud squeezed in, covered these outer toes. And then, over the years, the mud that was covering it eroded away, exposing the other 2 toes. But because of that fact right there, that's one of the reasons that a few of the people, not all of the people, but a few of the people at ICR withdrew support of the human and dinosaur footprints together. Now, the most recent book on the subject is this one, Texas Tracks and Artifacts. These guys have spent a lot of time researching it. You need to understand what the problem is now with the tracks. The ones that have been exposed for 80 years or 90 years, of course, are destroyed, eroded. The ones that have been cut out and saved in museums someplace, the scoffers are going to say, how do we know those came from the river? So you can't win either way, all right? Even though they videotape while they're excavating these things, they document it, they bring in the news media. Carl Ball lives there. Has a museum there, and owns part of the property, and has studied this for years and years and years. That's where his museum is. Now, if you go to Glen Rose, there are 2 museums. You need to be very careful. One teaches evolution and will say, there aren't any human tracks out here. If you go to the state park, they will say, oh, there's no human tracks. Who's spreading that propaganda? But if you go half mile down the road to Carl Ball's museum, you can see the copies of the footprints, the photographs, all the video footage of as they've done all this. What they've done, since the tracks in the river get destroyed by the weather, they will, since they know where the trails are, they have them marked, where the different trails of human tracks are. You can see it in the different books. They go to the river to the edge of the river, chisel out some more rock. There's more footprints underneath. The trail continues under the rock. And they've been doing that for years, exposing more footprints. Dr. Ball has done many digs down there, exposing more human footprints and more dinosaur footprints in this region. Well, finally they now have said you can't dig into the creek bank because creeks have rights. Oh, brother. Environmentalists, I give them a hard time. They'll say, trees have rights and creeks have rights. And I say, yep, and oxygen molecules have rights, and you ought to quit breathing. That's what I tell them. They don't know what to say to that. But the books on the subject, if you want to read a lot more, would be this one, The Valley of the Giants by Dr. Daugherty. I don't know if it's still in print. There's a phone number in the front cover if you want to try to get that. Texas Tracks and Artifacts we offer through our ministry here. It's the most recent update on the tracks, including lots of maps and interesting information about the human footprints. And this one is out of print. They still have a warehouse full of them. You might talk them into selling you one. I don't know. You could call ICR and say, can I buy that book tracking those incredible dinosaurs? I don't think they sell them or will sell them. Now, several people from ICR in recent months have gone to Texas and are looking at this situation again and saying, hey, to my knowledge, Dwayne Gish has always supported the idea. And Henry Morris, I believe, still supports the idea. There's a few folks there who do, a few folks there who don't. Doesn't matter to me. I've been there myself. I've seen it. Joe Taylor has a fascinating museum just out in Crosbyton, Texas, near Amarillo, West Texas. Joe Taylor has spent a long time studying the tracks there also. And you might want to get this book, Fossil Facts and Fantasies, by Joe Taylor, where he goes, we offer this through our ministry also. That would be a good one for you to read, Eric. Okay. The tracks vary in size. Some are just normal human size, size 8, 10, 12. This one is a size 24, the one that I have a casting of. Now, this casting shrank a ½ inch when the aluminum cooled. This is cast in aluminum. So we have made a high-density styrofoam copy of this, which we sell in our ministry here, if you'd like one to hang on the wall for a conversation starter. The high-density styrofoam one is exact same size and much lighter to carry around. This is a real nuisance to haul around in the suitcase, which I've done for years to put on display for the kids to step in. The biggest track they found, I believe, was 24 inches long. This was 17 inches. 24-inch track would be size 35 or something. I don't know. Pretty big. I understand there's some basketball player, Lanier or something like that, that has a size 31 shoe or 33 or something like that. Shaquille O'Neal is a 24 or size 22. Shaquille's is almost this big, not quite. I was at a church one time and there was a kid who had a size 18. He just almost filled it up. So there are people today with feet this big. The difference between this one and modern people today with feet that size, this one's wider. Well, anybody that goes barefoot all their life gets a wider foot. You wear shoes all your life, your foot stays a little narrower than it does if it can spread out, as you walk barefoot. So they've done a lot of excavations there in this region. They've even taken some footprints and sawed them across. You can see where they sawed this one across the toes and across the heel of the foot. And when they look at it endways, they see the mud has squeezed up between the toes. Now, some people have argued, like Kurt Wise from Bryan College, a very smart man, and loves the Lord and is a young earth creationist, but he doesn't go along with the footprints there because he thinks you can see these marl lines other places as you cut through. These little lines, these curves as if it was squeezed up into the toes. He said you see that all through the rock. That doesn't prove a thing. That's his point. Okay? So you may not get any support from him if you go to that region, but he's on our side. He's a smart guy. The steps, though, that were found in Texas, in some instances, were 6 or 7 feet between steps. The guy would be probably 8 or 10 feet tall. My normal stride is about 3 feet. If I'm running, of course, it's more. If a guy's 10 feet tall, his normal stride would probably be 6 feet without a problem. Here's Dr. Baugh, a picture with him showing dinosaur and human tracks together, just a few inches away from each other. I was preaching in Arizona. The associate pastor of the church came to me and said, Brother Hovind, I grew up in Glen Rose. And he told me a story. I said, Brother, I want you to put this in writing because people don't believe me. I've got to document everything I say. You know, the scoffers will strain at a gnat in something the creationists say, and then they swallow the camel like believing we're related to a rock, 4.5 billion years ago. I don't know how they can do that. But here's what this guy said. His name is David Smith, Associate Pastor, First Southern Baptist Church in Cottonwood, Arizona. There's phone number and address and all that stuff right there. He said, Mr. Hovind, I grew up in Glen Rose. He said, I went on an excavation with Dr. Carl Baugh, who lives there. We followed the footsteps of a man which were beside a dinosaur's footprints. It was as if the man were walking with the dinosaur. Nova was there to film the dig. There was also an evolutionist there who had been arguing with Dr. Baugh the entire time. Nova didn't film much of the tracks or our dig, but they did interview this evolutionist. Now, Nova, in case you don't know, is a science program. I come on TV once in a while. They show Nova. It means a star that explodes is called a nova. If a big star explodes, they call it a supernova. So it just means an exploding star. In Spanish, nova means won't go, will not move. So the Chevy Nova that sold up here in America, when they took it to Mexico to try to sell it, they had a very hard time selling the car. Would you like to buy a no-go? Oh, I don't think so. Had to put a new name on it or something down there. But, okay, Nova is a TV program that does stuff on science. Nova came to film the interview with this evolutionist and Dr. Baugh, and supposed to film the tracks, report on it. He said he told them he had not seen anything there to disprove evolution. What he didn't tell the camera was that he had refused to even turn around and look at the tracks we had been working on. This associate pastor told me, he said, Brother Hovind, we would dig out the tracks, we would tap this guy in the shoulder and say, sir, look at this. He would say, I don't want to see it. There can't be human tracks here. He wouldn't even look at it. So then he told the camera, I've not seen anything here to disprove evolution. Well, of course not. You wouldn't turn around and look at it. See, in some people's minds, their theory is so important. Any evidence against it, they can't tolerate that thought. It's called in the theory of cognitive dissonance. You run into this when you deal with any of the cults. When you start to prove what they believe is wrong, their brain just rejects it. Can't be true. Of course, I've been taught this all my life. It has to be true. And we all are probably guilty of that, and you have to constantly guard against that. Okay, this guy continues. He said, this man stood with his back to the dig and the tracks while making these statements. Nova knew this man had not looked at the tracks, but they did not report that. Nor did they give Dr. Baugh equal airtime to respond. This is not education. This is indoctrination, and this is the stuff we face all the time. Eric, you get into the debates, and you say, these guys are indoctrinated. They're not interested in being educated. They just want to be told what to believe. Okay. One guy said, there must have been a dinosaur then that had feet like a human, if there are human tracks here. That was his reasoning. The petrified hammer that Dr. Baugh has in the museum is pretty fascinating. Battelle Laboratories analyzed it. This was found in 1934 in London, Texas. So it's not in Glen Rose, but it's in the same rock layer that runs through Glen Rose, Texas. This London artifact, they call it, found 1934. They had already dated the seashells around this hammer at 400 million years old. Part of the handle had turned to coal, and part was petrified. Battelle Laboratories said it was 96.6% iron, 0.26, I can't read, pardon me? 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74% sulfur. Well, now, my understanding is that their analysis of the hammer revealed there's no carbon, and to make stainless steel, you have to have carbon. And the story that I understand is that they were telling Dr. Baugh that you cannot produce this alloy, you can't get these things to combine, unless you do it under a much stronger electromagnetic field. Well, today, our magnetic field around the Earth is pretty weak. Your compass still points north, but your body can't tell which way is north. Bees can, and birds can. They can tell which way is north. They just feel it because of the magnetic field, built-in compass. Probably, at the time of the original creation, the magnetic field was about 20 times stronger. We assume that based upon the 300-year study that's been done. In the last 300 years, we've seen the magnetic field of the Earth decline. There's been a 6% decline in 150 years. So that little 6% decline could fit all sorts of curves. You know, I'm not sure, nobody's sure which curve it is, but given the best of circumstances, the magnetic field of the Earth was probably about 20 times stronger. A stronger magnetic field would prevent any meteors from getting in, or most meteors. It would also prevent a lot of radiation from getting in. Everything is focused around the poles. And you could actually feel which way is north, which means you could not get disoriented. You ever been lost? You don't know where you are. Which way do I go? It probably could not happen. See, God thought of everything. When He created the world, He thought of everything. And I suspect after the flood was over, when Noah and his boys got off the ark and they saw this world was destroyed, there probably some bitterness crept in. Like, man, now this is awful. We got to live in this junkyard for the rest of our life. And some people think that's why Noah's son, Ham, became wicked, went bad. And why within a few generations the whole civilization had gone bad again. Just bitterness against God taking away their beautiful world. And sometimes God takes away things from us. Look at Job. God took away everything. Job said, God, if you slay me, I'm still going to serve you. And it's hard to get that attitude, but that's what you got to have, God, you're taking this away from me. Oh, well, I'm going to serve you anyway. When we lost our first 3 kids, it was like, God, why? Hey, He's God. Doesn't matter. You don't ever need to find out why. You don't ever have to find out. You just keep loving Him and keep serving Him, okay? He can handle things. Okay, some people have argued they did not learn how to make brass and iron and things like this until just really modern times. You got to understand, God made Adam in His image. God probably showed Adam how to do lots of different things. I mean, there's probably 100 years before Adam sinned. Not only was Adam pre-programmed, of course, fully loaded computer, he spent time walking and talking with God. So God probably showed him all sorts of things. I would suspect God showed him how to find things in the ground, iron, how to do things with it. Here's how you build a fire to smelt this down, and if you add this, it'll increase the heat, and you only got to get to 2,600 degrees, and the iron melts. And I don't know what all God showed him. We'll find out when we get to heaven. But this knowledge of how to work with metals was right there in the first few generations. Tubal-Cain was an artificer in brass and iron. He made things out of these metals, so they had to dig these out of the ground, we would assume, unless the pre-flood world was very different in that, crystals and minerals and things were right on top of the ground in large quantities, and this was all destroyed and reburied in the flood, so now we have to dig for it. I don't know what it was like back then, but certainly they had iron before the flood. And many interesting artifacts are found buried in the ground. For instance, this bell was found in a lump of coal. If you go through West Virginia, Eric, be sure to stop. You called and didn't get to go there. Okay, it'd be neat to get a picture of you holding this thing, okay? This was sent to ICR, and they kept it for a long time to analyze it. They sliced out one of the little bumps in the handle. They figured they could sacrifice one bump, put it back together, and use that bump to, you got to grind it up to analyze it. So that's how they took a sample out. It actually was, if I understand, when it was originally found, the handle had one extra bump in it. But they cut out a piece and had it analyzed to find out what it is. You can call Newt Anderson, 304-842-5556, and talk to him about it. He's the guy who found it. He was about 10 years old when he found this thing in West Virginia. He was breaking open a lump of coal to put in the fire or something, and there was this bell inside. He showed it to his dad or somebody, and you could see where the impression of the bell was in both pieces of coal. The coal had formed around it, obviously. I don't think they saved the coal halves that it came out of, but they saved the bell. And there's his address. You can write to him or call him and get all the information you want about it. Textbooks tell the kids that coal formed 250 million years ago. One of the layers of rock in the geologic column is called the Carboniferous era. Carboniferous from the word carbon, coal. That's why they call it Carboniferous era. There's no such thing as a Carboniferous era. What happened was during the flood, billions of trees would be buried. For one thing, there's an awful lot of coal in the ground right now. There's enough coal, so much coal, that you couldn't make it with all the trees we have in the world. There's too much coal. If you took every tree and bush in the world and smashed it, you couldn't produce the coal in the ground. Very true. And therefore, skeptics say, see, this proves it took millions of years to do this. No, this proves there were more trees before the flood came. Not only more trees, but bigger trees. Okay, so this flood buried all sorts of things. We find the bell found in coal. In 1891 in Morrisonville, Illinois, Mrs. Culp found a lump of coal, broke it open, and it was a gold chain attached to both halves. About 10 inches long, a little gold chain. The last I heard, Bob Jones University has the chain and the coal. I've tried to trace it down. I called Michael Cremo, who's written the book, The Hidden History of the Human Race. Now, he's a Hindu, and he has a great book, though, on Hidden History of the Human Race, showing human artifacts found where they shouldn't be. They call it OOPArt, out-of-place artifacts. That'd be a good one. Write that down for the quiz. What is OOPArt? O-O-P, out-of-place artifacts, A-R-T. An artifact is something made by man. So an OOPArt is an out-of-place artifact. Michael Cremo collects information on these things, has a tremendous book on all these out-of-place artifacts, and says here we have human chain, obviously humanly crafted chain, in rock 250 million years old. So he says, therefore, this proves man was here 250 million years ago. No, Michael, this proves the rock's not 250 million years old. A lot of these guys do this great research on this type of thing and come to the wrong conclusion. See, they're stuck with the idea that evolution is true. They're stuck with the idea the geologic column is true. Now, how do we fit this OOPArt into this theory? And that's where the whole problem comes in. I called all the culps I could find in Illinois. I spent a fortune on the phone when I was up there, calling culps, trying to trace down what happened to it. The last we could find from the Morrisonville Times, and everybody I called, was 1959. Some guy had it, this lump of this chain, in his house as a oddball souvenir, and I hadn't found it since then until the rumor I just got a few months ago was that Bob Jones University has it. So I need to call, find out. You can put that on your list, Becky, to call Bob Jones and see if they have the chain found in Illinois. Carl Baugh has this iron pot. He bought it for a fortune off the people who found it. 1912, iron pot was found inside a lump of coal in Oklahoma. This is a smelting pot for melting, probably small quantities of gold or something to heat it up to get rid of the impurities. This would be the theory. He's making replicas of this to sell. If somebody would like a replica of the iron pot, we're going to get one for our little museum here. But this thing was found in Massachusetts. It's supposed to be over 600 million year old rock. Intricately carved. Let's see, Brother Pratsuk, you do inlaid wood, small pieces of wood put together. This is all metal. Zinc and silver, all put together. Very beautiful. They were blasting a piece of rock, and this thing came flying out. Now, they'd already decided the rock is 600 million years old. So you find a obviously human artifact. You come to two conclusions. Either aliens came here 600 million years ago and left it behind, or humans were here 600 million years ago. They don't seem to realize the obvious, hey, maybe your whole geologic column is baloney. It didn't happen, didn't exist. I'll be tomorrow in Idaho, in Nampa, Idaho. I'm preaching in one of the suburbs there. It's a suburb of Boise. Back in 1889, they were drilling a well. When I was up there, a year ago, I guess, in Boise, I went to the museum where this little doll is, and I read the whole story. They're drilling. When they drill down, I don't know, Eric, if you remember when they drilled our well here for water, as they drill, they're pushing water down, and the sand piles up around the outside. They call that the tailings. As the sand comes up, they run it off into a little box to collect it, to let the water settle out so they can reuse the water to pump it through as they're drilling to keep the drill bit lubricated. Well, they were drilling in rock 320 feet down. They said this rock is 12 million years old, and this two broken pieces of a little doll came out. So, of course, Michael Cremo's solution is, well, this proves man was here 320 million years ago. No, this proves the doll. The whole geologic column doesn't exist. All of that was done in that one big flood. An obvious human artifact found in 320 million year old rock, they say. No, it's just from the flood this was formed. A couple more thoughts here and we'll take a break. This is from Creation Magazine, March of 94, showing what appears to be a battery from Iraq from 2,000 years ago. Everybody thinks, you know, we just invented electricity in the last, or discovered electricity in the last few hundred years. Fact of the matter is, we'll get into on video number 7 some evidence that they had electricity in Egyptian times 3,000 years ago. They were using it to gold plate things. Different metals, you can use electricity and gold plate them. Workers in Colorado found human bones and a copper arrowhead inside a vein of silver. 1880, they were digging in California. They kept reporting, as they're down deep in these gold mines in California. Placerville, you were just there. Okay, in Placerville, they were digging in these gold mines, and they found all sorts of human artifacts. Arrowheads, spear points, mortar and pestle, like you grind up corn with, you know, or something like that. But they're digging for gold, under layers of lava that everybody said was somewhere between 9 and 55 million years old. Well, if you're underneath a layer of lava, digging a shaft back into the mountain, and you're finding human artifacts, what are you going to say? How did they get there? J.D. Whitney collected boxes of these things, published articles about it, about things found in California gold mines, down underground. They shouldn't be there. This is called an OOPArt, out-of-place artifact, according to the theory. W.H. Holmes of the Smithsonian, we'll see about them again later, one of the most vocal critics of the California finds, wrote, "Perhaps if Professor Whitney had fully appreciated the story of human evolution, as it is understood today, he would have hesitated to announce the conclusions, notwithstanding the imposing array of testimony with which he was confronted." Translate that for me. What's he saying? He should not have published these papers because it goes against the theory that we're teaching. Isn't that what he's saying? If you find something that goes against our theory of evolution, well, don't tell anybody about it. That's what he's saying right there, folks. And that is indeed the attitude that we see. In 1950s, Thomas Lee of the National Museum of Canada found advanced stone tools in glacial deposits in Lake Huron, however you pronounce that island. The deposits were supposed to be 65,000 to 125,000 years old. The director of the museum was fired for refusing to fire the discoverer. Tons of artifacts disappeared into storage bins at the National Museum of Canada. The discovery had to be killed. They said it would have forced the rewriting of almost every book in the business. Now, folks, this is not science. If you have to throw out any evidence that doesn't fit your theory, you have a religion, not a scientific theory. Evolution is a religious idea, and when you find advanced stone tool artifacts underneath glacial deposits that you think are so many thousand years old, well then, maybe you ought to relook at the whole picture. Lots of things are found. Human artifacts are found under lava flows, like the California gold mines, and under glacial deposits. I'm telling you, the flood buried the world. The pre-flood world was buried by this massive flood in the days of Noah. And that's why we're finding human artifacts inside sedimentary rock, under glacial deposits, under lava flows. I'm sure there are lots of volcanoes going off during the flood, causing lava, sometimes pillow lava if it's underwater, or ash or layers of ash. And I don't know that the flood, we'll get into a lot more of that when we get into video number 6 on the flood, but I would not say that the flood was continuous chaos over every square inch of the earth, every minute. I think there were probably times when the crust of the earth was flexing up and down, and there would be times where certain areas would be above ground, maybe for a few weeks, in which case you would get wind-blown sand. You may get sand layers, wind-blown dry sand. It would dry out shortly, the surface would, and blow around in a couple of weeks, and then that area gets submerged again. So I think when we see the video in heaven of how the flood happened, you'll say, oh, so that's how this happened, like the cross-bedding of the sandstone in Grand Canyon and all this kind of stuff. Okay. God gave them not only in this original creation a perfect world to live in, He gave them a perfect diet. He told them what to eat. God said in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 29, "Behold, I have given you every green herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. God told them to eat the fruit, the vegetables, and the seeds. You know, we don't do that much anymore. We eat the hamburger, French fries, and Coke. And here God said, eat the fruit, the vegetables, and the seeds. It would surprise you to keep a list of everything you eat for 1 week. And then go back and read the list. I mean, everything goes in your mouth. Everything you drink and everything you eat for 1 week. Just go back and read the list a week later. And you'll say, boy, I didn't eat much fresh fruit, did I? Not many fresh vegetables, not many seeds. And we're slowly digging our grave with our spoon. And I think an awful lot of people die of diseases and get to heaven early. Christians get to heaven early. And they say, God, why didn't you heal me? I asked you to heal me. I had this disease. And God said, look, I put it in the first chapter. I told you to eat the fruit, the vegetables, and the seeds, and you didn't do it. Don't blame me that you're up here. That's your own fault. It's like somebody that never changes oil in their car, and the motor blows up. So they call up the dealer, you know, my motor blew up. Well, have you changed oil? No, then it's your fault. It's not the dealer's fault, and it's not the manufacturer's fault. It's your fault. And I think most disease problems we have and health problems we have today in the world, the vast majority of them are our fault. And we'll get into that in a minute. But if you eat a peach, you should actually eat the seed if it's organically grown. Now, this is important. You don't want to get an artificially stimulated peach that had pesticides and herbicides and all that kind of stuff on it. Organically grown fruit has seeds that contain a string. Now, I don't mean eat the hull, the hard part. Inside is a nut that looks like an almond, and it tastes terrible. It'll give you a pucker that'll last about an hour and a half. Some of the old-timers look at me and say, pucker, what is that for? Man, I used to know. My dad said, you know you're getting old when you get all the way across the room to give your wife a kiss, and then you forgot why you came. Yep, getting old, Dad. But I think the seeds contains a vitamin called vitamin B17. Now, I won't go into a long explanation of all of this, because you need to get the book World Without Cancer. That has a great, the first half of the book is all about the biology of how cancer works. The second half of the book is all about the politics of why the cure has been suppressed for so long. Why they don't talk about the cure for cancer when it's been known for generations, you know, how to fix or prevent cancer. But the seeds contain cyanide, and I believe benzaldehyde is the other part. Both of them separately are very poisonous. You put them together, though, and it's nutritious. Some people argue that cyanide is poisonous, and well, yeah, it is, but that's like saying hydrogen is explosive, therefore don't spray water on a fire because it contains hydrogen. Well, of course, that's silly, you know. Water is hydrogen and oxygen, neither one of which do you want to put around a fire if you're trying to put the fire out. And yet you put them together, and it makes water. The cyanide found in the seeds is nutritious to the body until it bumps into a cancer cell. The coating on a cancer cell is the only known substance that will dissolve away break up the vitamin and cause the cyanide to be deadly, and only at that location. So it's selectively poisonous. It's going to kill the cancer cell. There's a couple of good websites, canceranswer.com or worldwithoutcancer.com or hacres for hallelujahacres.com, that can give you lots of information on how to be healthy in this world. But the cancer that we have today is silly that people should die of cancer when it's a nutritional deficiency. I remember one time we were trying to start my Volkswagen. We couldn't get it to start. My brothers had helped me, my dad had helped me. I was only 16, you know, my Volkswagen wouldn't run. We put in new points, new plugs, new distributor cap, new rotor cap. We adjusted the valves, we set the timing, and everything we could think of, and it just wouldn't run. We pushed it, and it would sputter and then die. It would just start to run and then die. Finally, after about 2 hours of working on this dumb car, one of my brothers said, look, I know you said there's gas in the tank, but I'm going to check. And he opened up the gas tank, and sure enough, it was out of gas. So I think an awful lot of our medical attention these days is misdirected. We're looking for the virus or the bacteria or something that's causing this disease when it's a lack of something that's causing the disease. It's not the virus or the bacteria, it's the lack of a certain nutrient or vitamin. There's a tribe of folks in northern Pakistan called the Hunzas. Right there on the map you can see Hunza. Hunza is up in the Himalaya Mountains. Some people pronounce it Himalaya Mountains, but it's up in the northern part of this country of Pakistan. There's the Hunza tribe right there. My understanding of this, and people argue about this story, let me just tell you the story, and then, you know, people argue that it's true or not, but I understand when the Hunza tribe was first discovered, about 200 years ago or so, by outsiders at least, the average age was 160. People in Hunza lived to be 160 on the average. As they had more and more contact with the outside world, it dropped down, and today the average age in Hunza is 90. Well, it's still not bad. Living to be 90 is not bad when you consider the average age in America is about 75, and the average age of medical doctors in America is 58. You might want to stop and think about that, So the Hunza leaders average about 90 years of age, and they never get cancer. And their favorite food to eat is apricot seeds. Well, it just so happens that the apricot seed has more of this vitamin B17, or they're called nitrilicides. Now, certain grasses have this also. You see dogs or cats get sick and go out and eat grass. It contains this vitamin B17, or nitrilicides, or some people call it amygdalin, other people call it laetril, all talking about the same thing. The apricot seed, as far as I understand this, is the highest concentrate of B17 found in nature. And in Hunza, they measure their wealth based upon how many apricot trees they have. It's not how much money do you have, it's how many apricot trees have you got. And so the stories I have read about this say that the Hunzas, after a tree first starts producing fruit, they will break open one of the apricots, take out the seed, and taste it. And if it doesn't taste a certain way, they cut the tree down and plant another one. They know the tree's no good. So it's a big science over there with them, at least. The importance, that's their cash crop, their money. And they never get cancer. Now, if you look at the chart here, people who take nutritional therapy have a much higher survival rate than those who take conventional therapy with cutting and burning and radiation and all that kind of stuff. There are survivors, of course, from both groups, but you have a higher chance of survival with nutritional therapy if you treat it using nutrients, what God has created for the world. For years, the sailors used to die of a dreaded disease called scurvy. The British Navy lost 1 million sailors to scurvy. Scurvy is horrible. You can see what it does to your skeleton. It deforms everything. Sailors were dying of scurvy by the thousands, and over 1 million of them, just from Great Britain over the years. Well, in 1953, Dr. Lind had told that, if you eat fruit, you don't get scurvy. He said, I'm not sure what's in it, but there's something in fruit that prevents scurvy. And, of course, everybody laughed at him. Yeah, we're medical doctors. We've been to school, Here you think a fruit will fix a disease. We're busy looking for the cure, you crackpot. What do you think a fruit will do? And typical response today, same thing. Then finally, after 50 more years of people dying, in 1795, the medical profession admitted that fruit would cure or prevent scurvy. And so they started making the British sailors take limes on board the ships. And they called them the limeys. That's where the name comes from, because they had to bring the limes on board. And beriberi was a dreaded disease people died from until 1882, when they finally found the cure was vitamin B. Rickets, vitamin D deficiency. Even today they put vitamin D in your milk. It's vitamin D reinforced because we're not getting enough sunlight. At least we don't get exposed. Well, some people get everything exposed to the sun, but most people don't get enough sunshine to get the vitamin D that the skin, from the sunshine on the skin, causes vitamin D to be formed. Anyway, many diseases are simply deficiencies of certain vitamins. And cancer is a deficiency of a vitamin, of several vitamins. By the time you get cancer, you're probably low on a bunch of stuff. But the Bible says in Psalm 104, bread, God gave herb for the service of man, and bread to strengthen man's heart. That's kind of strange. The herbs are given for our service. Herbs do all sorts of things. They can calm your nerves. You can take certain herbs and just relax and go and sleep better at night. People take melatonin, for instance. It's not a drug. It's just a herb that'll help you go to sleep. And there's a whole study you can study for a lifetime on different herbs and the effects that they have on various different things in human physiology. But this verse continues and says, bread strengthens man's heart. Well, that's an interesting verse. See, about 100 years ago, they had to bake the bread fresh every day because it would go bad. I mean, bread just wouldn't store very long because they were making it from natural components, from wheat that was fresh ground, stone ground wheat, and all this kind of stuff. And the bread would go bad. Well, of course, the Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil, and they discovered what's making the bread go bad and therefore losing profits is three things at least: vitamin E, lecithin, and the omega-3 fatty acids. Now, we have got an entire videotape called The Bible and Health in our green series of tapes, the topical tapes. You might want to get that one if you want a whole lot more on the Bible and health, because there's just so much to talk about in this area. We'll just suffice it to say that when they took these things out of the bread, two things happened. The bread started lasting much longer, and therefore profits go up. And people started having diseases like heart attacks and strokes and circulation problems. There's a simple formula I tell the kids to remember. The whiter the bread, the quicker you're dead. It's just that simple. They took out about 17, I think, or 19 nutrients and vitamins out of the wheat and flour and invented white bread. Then they added back a few synthetic vitamins and called it enriched flour, enriched bread, and it's killing people. It's not because the bread is harmful to you, though it probably is a little bit. It's because you think you're full, therefore you're satisfied, therefore you're nourished. Well, you could fill your stomach full of sand and feel full, but you're not nourished. Okay? So being full and being nourished are two different things, and an awful lot of people go through life filling their stomach, but they never nourish their system. And you have to really watch that you pay attention to that. It boils down to the two basic philosophies of health and medicine. One philosophy is based upon evolution thinking. Okay? That says your body is nothing but a random collection of chemicals that form by chance over billions of years, and so you treat diseases by adding more chemicals. You add more drugs. It is called drug therapy. If you have a headache, you say, "Oh, doc, I got a headache." He says, "Here, take an aspirin." Well, now hold it. What caused your headache? Was it the lack of an aspirin that caused the headache? I don't think so. You see, what you're doing, you're treating a symptom. And medical doctors go to school and they study how the body does certain things, like how is the pain reflex sent, to the head? What's causing the headache? How do the nerves fire across the synapse, and how can we block that? Well, I think you're barking up the wrong tree here. Instead of figuring out how to give the opposite of the symptom, why not figure out what's causing it? What's causing the headache? Okay, it's not the lack of an aspirin that's causing it. If you're driving on the highway and the oil light comes on the dash of your car, you have two choices. Number one, you can stop and find and fix the problem. Or number two, you can unplug the light. If you say, "Well, the light bothers me, trying to drive and that red light shining right in my face," well, unplug it. Of course, that'd be stupid to do, because the light is trying to tell you something. You're low in oil. Maybe your pump quit, or maybe you just don't have enough oil, or who knows what happened, but a lot of things can happen. The fact is, you better fix the problem instead of unplug the light. And if you go look in your medicine cabinet, you will find a whole bunch of stuff that unplugs lights. That's what drugs do. And sometimes that is necessary. I'm not against taking drugs if you need them for certain things. Go to the doctor. If I get my arm cut off, it's not the time to take a vitamin. It's the time to go to the hospital. And doctors certainly have their place, and there are some awful good godly men. But I am convinced they have kind of a wrong philosophy because they're trained with an evolution underlying thinking that says you treat diseases by adding more chemicals because we're just made from chemicals anyway. If doctors were trained from a biblical perspective that says, God designed the body, and God gave us foods and vitamins and minerals to meet our needs, then they would have a nutrition philosophy. See, all sorts of diseases are actually nutritional deficiencies. For instance, if you have warts, you're probably low in zinc. If you get hangnails easily, you're probably low in vitamin C. Or if your gums bleed, or if you get cramps in your muscles, you're probably low in vitamin C. If you get arthritis or sinus trouble, you're probably low in a bunch of minerals that most of them are found in alfalfa. Just start taking alfalfa, and a lot of those symptoms will disappear. Now, if you have a sinus headache, you can take, Sinutab or something to kill the pain, but you didn't fix the problem. Didn't fix it at all. The problem is, here in America at least, we want the cure right now. I got a headache, I want it gone in 15 minutes or less, as opposed to looking for the long-term solution. We want the quick fix, and eventually that's going to kill you. There's another philosophy called creation, which says God designed your body, and you meet the needs with nutrients. It's nutrition therapy, nutrition theory. You eat the herbs, the vitamins, and the minerals. Okay, let's hurry. There are two philosophies of government also based upon creation and evolution. See, if evolution is true, then there's no creator. So laws come from man's opinion. We get a bunch of folks together, and we are going to vote on what's right and wrong. And if the majority think abortion's okay, well, then it must be okay. That's what evolution does, because it takes away the creator, therefore we decide what's best. If evolution is true, then rights are granted by the government. I ask people all the time, do you have the right to drive on the highway? Yeah. Our founding fathers said we have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You can pursue things, you can go places, you can travel. Well, then why do you ask the state for permission to do that? Why would you need to get a state driver's license to do something that God already gave you the right to do? Interesting. I don't have one, and I don't have time for the hassle, so I have an international driver's license, and therefore you can just, travel as much as you want, anywhere you want, drive anything you want. And the policemen look at it and say, well, what is this, you know? And they say, keep going. They don't ever bother you. And that gets into a whole other area. We've got a videotape called Straw Man you might want to get. We don't advertise that one. It's kind of politically incorrect. But if you want to get the Straw Man video, call our office. They can get you information on that at 877-479-DINO. And they'll send you our Straw Man video. That's only if you want the red pill, for those who saw The Matrix. If you want the blue pill, well, then do not watch the Straw Man. See, rights are granted by God. But if evolution is true, there is no God, so rights are granted by government. And the government should be the all-powerful provider. And today we got a bunch of folks who have evolution philosophy. When they have a problem, they look to government for the solution. You know, the government ought to take care of those poor people over there. The government ought to take care of this, and the government ought to do this. And, well, now, wait a minute. We're supposed to be individually accountable. When they were having the big deal on TV and on the news years ago about Hillary's health care plan. She wanted universal health coverage, you know, and they showed these sick people. They don't have any insurance. Oh, we ought to take care of them. Hold on a minute. I understand. People need to be taken care of. However, whose job is it? It's the church's job in cases like that, not the government's job. For one thing, 70 to 80% of all medical expenses in America are from problems that are self-induced. I mean, they take drugs, they overeat, they don't take care of themselves, they don't watch their diet, they smoke cigarettes, and it causes them enormous health problems. And about 70 to 80% of all of our expenses in America are from self-induced problems. Well, they were on the radio discussing this, you know, Hillary's health care plan years ago. And I called in, I said, you know, I forgot to change oil in my car, and the motor blew up. I'd like everybody to help me buy a new motor. And they said, well, if you forgot to change oil in your car, that's your problem. I said, yes, and don't you see it's exactly what you're doing here with health care? If you forget to take your vitamins and you eat junk food all your life and you smoke and you drink and you take drugs and you cuss and you run around with women and wild women and you get diseases, you want me to help pay for your health? I think you created the problem, then you ought to fix it. Or you ought to pay for it, that's for sure. I should not have to pay for their stupidity. And if my neighbor blows up his car engine because he doesn't change oil, I'm not going to help him pay for it. I don't want to be forced to pay for it. I might do it out of Christian charity. But see, taxes are really forced contributions. Put a gun to your head, give me your money. Okay? That's not voluntary. Totally opposite of the Christian philosophy. If evolution philosophy follows through, you end up with a democracy where the majority of the people get together and decide what's right and wrong. Not at all what the Bible intended. Our founding fathers in this country said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It came from the Creator. God made us. Those folks, now they weren't all Christians, but they were strongly influenced by Christianity. And they thought God created it. They said that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Rights that you cannot put a lien against. Well, where do rights come from? The right to get married, for instance. When my son Eric got married, he did not get a marriage license. He had a marriage covenant. He and his wife agreed and promised, according to the Scripture, to be married, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, all that stuff. And all you needed, until about 100 years ago, there was no such thing as a marriage license. You just both signed the page in the family Bible, had 2 witnesses sign it, and poof, you're married. Marriage licenses came in only after the Civil War, when former slaves wanted to marry outside of their race. Some states said, well, you got to get our permission to do that. Which you don't, by the way, but that's what they said. And so it gradually grew to everybody gets a marriage license. And they don't realize a marriage license is a 3-way contract between you and your wife and the state. And that contract basically says, if we don't like the way you're raising your kids, the state gets to take them away. Well, why would you sign a contract like that? But if you don't have a marriage license, then they give you a hard time with bank accounts, and it's a giant problem. And defending our rights has always been a long, difficult thing to do. And I think it's worth doing, and I do. But you need to defend the Founding Fathers' freedoms that they bought for us. So if creation is true, then there's a Creator. And He decides what's right and wrong, and He gives us certain rights that you can't take away. And you don't need the government's permission to do things that God told you can do. Now, if you ask them for permission, they'll be glad to sell it to you, of course. But you don't need to ask their permission to do certain things. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. Now, he was not a Christian. I doubt that he's in heaven. I mean, I hope he is, but I doubt it. He did not believe in miracles. Here's Jefferson's Bible. I have it here on the screen. The last verse in Jefferson's Bible says, "There laid they Jesus, and rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed." End of the Bible. He thought that's where it stopped. He didn't believe Jesus rose from the dead, and therefore the whole New Testament was irrelevant. But in spite of the fact that he was a deist and not a Christian, he was influenced by Christianity, and he certainly believed there had to be a creator, and he believed the creator gave us rights. And that's why they wrote the Declaration of Independence and threw all the tea in the harbor and, founded this great country we have. And it's amazing how many folks today talk about how great the founding fathers were. We put their faces on our coins and on our money, and we write about them in our Christian textbooks, and we should. But yet, if it happened again today, it'd be about the same as it was back then. Only 3% of the population followed or supported the revolution. The rest were Tories who were opposed to it or didn't care. The majority of folks didn't care which side won. They thought it was just going to be, nothing would change. And I think today we have an awful lot of people who have given in to unnecessary demands of our government. I think you should obey the law. I do. I obey the law. But I would be throwing the tea in the harbor tonight if the party was going on. Okay, we got to hurry. If creation is true, then laws come from the Creator, and rights are unalienable, and the government should be limited. There's only two functions of government that they're supposed to be doing: punish evildoers and defend our shores, defend our country. The government should not be involved in education. They should not be involved in welfare. They should not be involved in about 80% of the things they're involved in. They just have no business being involved in it. And so if we get back to the constitutional limits of our government, the budget would drop to real far down there, probably about 2 or 3% of what it is today. This is called a constitutional republic. Now, in a republic, the law is supreme. Everybody obeys the law because the law came from the Creator. I mean, the president, her husband, everybody on down should obey the law. That's a constitutional republic. Genesis 1:30, God said to every beast of the earth and every fowl of the air and everything that creeps on the earth wherein there is life, I've given green herb for meat. And it was so. Originally, every beast ate plants. Some people say, look at those teeth, man, that's a meat eater. No, that happens to be a close-up view of a panda bear. He's a vegetarian. This is a skull of a fruit bat. He lives on fruit. Has very sharp teeth. Here's a vegetarian monkey. All it does is eat plants and vegetables. It's got sharp teeth. Before the flood came, everything was vegetarian. Man and animals were all vegetarian, so they weren't afraid of each other. Nobody's going to eat you. Everybody's fine. The animals didn't have to fear man. After the flood was over, in Genesis chapter 9, God said to Noah and the boys, go have a bunch of kids. And boy, they did too. He said, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth. The first change after the flood, animals became afraid of man. The second change after the flood, God said, every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. So God is saying it's okay to eat meat now. You can eat anything that moves, and it's perfectly fine to eat meat, and I do. Okay, I'm not a vegetarian, though vegetarians are probably healthier. Pork chops and bacon taste awful good, so I eat them once in a while. Paul said in Romans chapter 8, he said, for I reckon, by the way, that proves he's a southerner, he said, I reckon that the sufferings of this present time, is there suffering in the world today? Tons of it, right? There's an awful lot of suffering in the world today, and that's what gets the atheist all confused. Charlie Darwin said, I am bewildered. I had no intention to write atheistically, but there seems to be so much misery in the world. Why would God make a world with suffering? He couldn't understand, if God made the world, why do the lions eat the zebras and the other animals? Well, Charlie, it's not the way God made it. See, God made a perfect world, and man wrecked it. But Charlie Darwin's philosophy, in his book, he said, thus, from the war of nature, from famine, from death, the most exalted object we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of higher animals, directly follows. He thought the way to get ahead, for things to get better, is for there to be struggle, suffering, death, misfits. This is Adolf Hitler's philosophy, folks, to a T. Hitler certainly believed that and practiced it. See, God made a perfect world. Animals were all friendly. The lions and the lamb would lay down together. And man destroyed that because of his sin. By one man, the Bible says, death came into the world. Sin came into the world, and death by sin. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians, by man came death. In Adam all die. The reason we have this death in the world is because of Adam's disobedience. And you can't look at a wrecked car and blame it on the manufacturer. Let's send this picture to Chrysler and say, hey, why did you build a smashed minivan? Well, they didn't build a smashed minivan. It got smashed later. And you can't look at today's wrecked world and say, see, God, you made a world of suffering and death. No, God made a perfect world. Man wrecked it when he sinned, and then the flood really wrecked it. So we're looking at a devastated world, folks. Today we live in a junkyard. This is not what God, I mean, this is the same planet, but it's not like God originally made it. It's just been destroyed. But God's going to fix it back someday. He said, someday the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. See, God's going to fix the world back like it used to be. Now, we're going to go through a time of suffering here, coming up any day. There's going to be some hard times. And people argue about where the 7-year tribulation fits, and do the Christians get raptured out at the beginning? I happen to believe that, though I'm willing to listen to other opinions. I believe I'm pre-trib rapture. Having studied the subject for years, I still am convinced that's true, though, like I said, I'm willing to listen. Some people think the Christians get raptured out in the middle. They're called mid-trib or post-trib. They get raptured, Christians get raptured out at the end, whoever's left, whoever survived the 7-year tribulation. And then we enter a 1,000-year reign of Christ. And I don't know, I wouldn't be real dogmatic on any of the positions, but the Bible certainly teaches there will be 7 years of trouble and turmoil on this world, and there will be a 1,000-year reign of Christ. And apparently God's going to fix things back like it used to be, because the lion shall eat straw like the ox. That's the way it's not that way now, but that's the way it's going to be. And a child shall die 100 years old, Isaiah 65 tells us. Well, apparently something's going to be different, maybe like it was back under the canopy in the Garden of Eden, where when you're 100 years old, you're still considered a child. That'd be neat to be a kid for 100 years. No responsibilities. That'd be great. I suspect God's going to fix the world back like it used to be in the Garden of Eden, and we will get to live here and see it like it used to be for 1,000 years. Rule and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. That's going to be great. Well, join us again next week. We'll talk more about the subject of creation and evolution and show you how dinosaurs fit in. Thank you so much.